There is a city buried under the American Midwest that was once larger than London. Not a town, not a settlement, a city, with pyramids, with plazas, with a population in the tens of thousands. It stood for 300 years on the banks of the Mississippi River, 8 miles from where St. Louis stands today. And then, sometime around the year 1350, every single person who lived there left. They weren't killed, they weren't conquered. There was no plague, no famine, no fire. In the record, the city didn't fall. It was abandoned. 20,000 people picked up their lives and walked away from the largest thing they had ever built. And for 200 years, until European settlers stumbled onto the mounds, no one on Earth remembered it had ever existed. We still don't know its real name. And in June of 2024, a study came out that took the one explanation we thought we had and quietly destroyed it. Let's start with what stood there. Around the year 1100, on the floodplain where the Mississippi, the Missouri, and the Illinois rivers all come together, there was a city called, and we'll come back to that word, called Cahokia. It covered 6 square miles. Somewhere between 15 and 20,000 people lived inside it, with tens of thousands more in the towns and farms that spread out around it. At that exact moment in history, London held about the same number of people. Paris was only a little larger. Sit with that for a second. At the same time that medieval Europe was building its cathedrals, there was a city on the Mississippi River, just as big, and almost no American has ever heard its name. At the center of it stood a pyramid. We call it Monk's Mound. It rises 100 feet into the air. In 4 enormous terraced steps, its base covers 14 acres, which makes its footprint larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Inside, it sits 22 million cubic feet of packed earth. Now here is the part that should stop you cold. The people who built it had no wheel. No metal tools, no horses, no oxen, no animal that could pull a load. They moved 22 million cubic feet of earth, one woven basket at a time, on foot, by hand, basket after basket for generations. When it was finished, it was the tallest man-made structure anywhere in what is now the United States, and it held that record for 700 years. Nothing built by anyone in this country stood taller than Monk's Mound until 1867. This was not a village of people scraping by. This was a civilization operating at a scale that Europe would have recognized instantly. And within about 250 years of reaching its peak, it was completely, totally empty. Before we ask why they left, you have to understand what they left behind. Because the emptiness only becomes strange when you see how much life was there first. The heart of the city was the Grand Plaza, 40 acres of open ground, deliberately leveled and packed flat by hand. It was a public space, an arena. Tens of thousands of people gathered there for ceremonies, for games, for markets, for the rituals that held the whole society together. Around it rose more than 120 mounds. Some were foundations for the homes of the elite. Some were temples, and some were tombs. In one of those tombs, archaeologists found the remains of more than 250 people. Many of them were young women. The evidence suggests they were buried together at the same time, as part of a single ceremonial event. Whatever belief system ruled Cahokia, it was powerful enough to command that. They tracked the heavens. On the edge of the city, they planted huge circles of wooden posts. Archaeologists call them woodhenge, aligned so precisely that they marked the sunrise on the solstices and the equinoxes. They rebuilt these circles again and again over generations. Their reach was continental: copper from the Great Lakes, seashells from the Gulf of Mexico, stone from the Rocky Mountains. All of it flowed into Cahokia along a trade network that touched a third of North America. This was the capital of a world. And then, one family at a time, that world walked out the door. For as long as anyone has studied Cahokia, the great question has been the same. Not how it rose, why it fell. And for decades, there were 2 confident answers. The first was that they did it to themselves. In the 1990s, the leading theory was ecological suicide. The idea went like this. The Cahokians cut down too many trees for fuel, for construction, for the endless palisade walls, and stripped the hills bare. Without roots to hold the soil, rain washed the earth downhill. The floods came, the fields drowned, and the people were driven out by a disaster of their own making. It was a tidy story. It was popular. And part of the reason it was popular is that it flattered a modern instinct. The idea that a civilization can consume itself to death. It sounded like a warning we already believed. There was just one problem. In 2021, an archaeologist named Caitlin Rankin went looking for the proof. If catastrophic floods had really driven out the people of Cahokia, the evidence would be right there in the ground. Layers of flood sediment around the base of the mounds. She dug, she sampled, she analyzed. There was no flood layer. The ground told her the floods, the theory required, had simply never happened. So the first theory died, and attention turned to the second one, drought. In 2019, a study reconstructed Cahokia's population, using an unusual source, traces of human waste preserved in the sediment of a nearby lake, which let researchers estimate how many people were living there across the centuries. They lined that up against the climate record, and there it was. A major drought struck the region in the late 1200s, right as the population began to fall. Less rain, less corn, less food. Everyone leaves. For 5 years, that was the answer. It went into the articles, it went onto the plaques. And then in June of 2024, Caitlin Rankin, the same archaeologist, came back. This time with Natalie Mueller, and this time they went after the drought. Here's what they did, and it's clever. When plants grow, they lock a signature into the soil, specific forms of carbon left behind by the vegetation that lived and died in that spot. Read those carbon signatures out of ancient soil, and you can tell what was actually growing there, and when. So Rankin and Mueller pulled carbon isotopes straight from the ground in the areas where Cahokia grew its food. Not the regional climate average, the actual dirt, the actual fields. And the fields told a different story than the sky. Yes, the regional drought was real. The wider Midwest did dry out. But down in the low-lying floodplain, where Cahokia actually farmed, the ground stayed wet. The plant life did not collapse. The soil signatures show vegetation continuing straight through the drought years, as if the dry spell in the region had barely touched the places that mattered most. And the people of Cahokia never depended on corn alone. They fished the rivers, they hunted deer and waterfowl. They grew squash and sunflowers and a whole family of native seed crops. Their diet was broad and it was resilient. The drought happened. The food supply held, which leaves us exactly nowhere and everywhere. Because now, both theories are dead. No flood drove them out. No famine starved them out. No enemy burned the city down. There is no layer of ash, no mass grave of the defeated, no sign of a final battle. A city the size of London, with its food supply intact, its environment stable, and no invader at the gates, emptied itself out anyway. So what's left? Rankin says it carefully, because it's the hardest kind of answer to prove. But she keeps returning to it. They left because they chose to, not driven out, not starved out, not burned out. They simply, over the course of a few generations, decided, family by family, that their future was somewhere else, and they walked away. I want you to notice how strange that is, because it breaks the shape of every collapse story we tell ourselves. We like our civilizations to end in fire. Pompeii under the ash. Rome sacked at the gates. We want a villain, or a disaster, or a lesson. We want the fall to mean something. Cahokia offers none of that. What it offers instead is quieter, and somehow heavier. A great city, at the height of its power, that its own people slowly stopped believing in. Maybe it was religion, a faith that lost its hold. Maybe it was politics, a ruling class people no longer wanted to feed. Maybe the young simply looked at the endless basket hauling, the mounds, the ceremonies, the crowding, and decided there was a better life. We can't read it from carbon isotopes. That part is gone. But here is what we do know. They did not vanish, they dispersed. Their descendants are alive, right now, in the Osage, the Ho-Chunk, the Chickasaw, and other nations that carry Mississippian blood. The people of Cahokia didn't die. They just stopped being the people of Cahokia. The mounds rose higher for centuries. And then, around 1250, they stopped building. The neighborhoods thinned. The plazas went quiet. And by 1400, last of them closed the door on the greatest city their world had ever known, and walked north, and never looked back. No final day, no last stand, no poem. 20,000 people, 20,000 quiet decisions to be somewhere else. If that sounds like something that could only happen in the deep past, I want to show you something closer. In 1950, the city of Detroit reached its peak. 1,849,000 people. The fourth largest city in the United States. The arsenal that built the machines that won the Second World War. One of the great skylines on Earth. By 2020, Detroit had about 630,000 people left. More than 1 million human beings walked out of that city over the span of 70 years. And look at the record for the cause. No war touched Detroit. No earthquake, no flood swept it away. The food kept coming. The water kept running. The buildings, many of them are still standing right now, empty. The people just decided to be somewhere else. Now this is not a perfect mirror, and I won't pretend it is. Detroit declined inside a nation of 300 million that absorbed everyone who left Cahokia, emptied off a continent that would not build a city that size again for 600 years, until Philadelphia in the 1700s. But the mechanism, the actual engine of the thing, looks unsettlingly familiar. A city at the top of the world. No single catastrophe, just individual people, one household at a time, across generations, quietly concluding that the future had moved. That is what Rankin's soil is pointing at. Not a Cahokia that failed. A Cahokia that its own children found less worth staying for than whatever waited over the horizon. We tell ourselves civilizations get destroyed. Every so often, the truth is stranger. Every so often, they just get left. Today, Cahokia is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, ranked officially alongside the pyramids of Egypt and the Great Wall of China. It sits 8 miles from downtown St. Louis, and it draws fewer visitors in a year than a mid-sized regional theme park. Most Americans will live their entire lives without ever learning that the largest city in the history of their country, before the founding fathers were born, was not on the East Coast. It was a metropolis of earthen pyramids on the Mississippi. Larger than London, built by hand without the wheel. We don't even have its real name. Cahokia is borrowed, the name of a different tribe that moved into the empty land centuries after the builders were gone. The people who raised those pyramids left us no word for themselves at all. What they left us instead is a question, and it is not the question we started with. We came here asking why Cahokia fell. The soil has a harder question waiting. Why did anyone build it? Pour 3 centuries and 22 million baskets of earth into it, only to walk away while it was still standing? Maybe every city we've ever built is closer to that answer than we'd like to think. I'll see you next time.